Hey everybody, welcome to Shift Your Story. It's your host, Lucy Price. Let's get started.
Okay, have you ever had a period in your life when you're like, I'm not gonna get into drama. I am not gonna engage with drama. I'm sick of conflict. I'm sick of people fighting. I'm sick of being wrapped up in all of this. It's just a headache. Like, have you ever had that moment in your life and you say, that's it, I'm done. But then somehow drama keeps following you. Like drama just kind of keeps circulating around you. You keep getting into conflicts with people and you just start to feel fed up. Well, if you have been in that spot, if you are currently in that spot, just know you're not alone. A lot of people deal with conflict and feeling like they're wrapped up in a bunch of conflict all the time. And it's one of those things that I think is a universal feeling. But we kind of swipe it under the rug a little bit. We kind of brush it off. We kind of try and ignore it, or the opposite. We get really bogged down in it and we think we're the only ones going through such a hard time. And if that's you, I have this juicy message for you today, because we are going to be talking about how to get out of fighting with people all the time, how to get out of drama, how to get out of conflict. And we're going to be doing that by sharing some of the reasons why I think you are getting into fights to begin with. Because if you know why you're getting into fights, you can stop doing those things. Or at least you can mitigate it to some degree. You can kind of support yourself through those moments. But I'm going to go ahead and dive straight on in. So one of the big reasons I see people get into conflict to begin with is that they ignore it. Weirdly enough, people ignore it. People avoid it. People are avoiding the conflict because the conflict feels like this big scary monster that's coming after you. And really by avoiding it, it's almost like the monster under your bed. Like you think there's a monster under your bed and you're scared and you don't want to look under the bed and you don't want to engage with it. But if you just looked under the bed, you'd realize that it wasn't actually a monster that's hiding under there. It's just a blanket. And that's kind of how I think conflict goes for some people, is that we think that this conflict is going to be a big scary monster, or it's going to be this big massive thing. If we disagree with somebody, if something isn't working for us and we speak up about it, we start freaking out. We start just freaking out about it. And I think that by ignoring the conflict and avoiding the conflict, like not wanting to get into conflict with someone, is actually what creates more conflict. And it creates more conflict because what ends up happening is there starts to become like this weird energy when you're in relationship with them. You start to like behave differently. And people pick up on energy. Energy is one of the quickest things that people pick up on. Most of our communication as people is actually done through like body language and tone of voice and the energy we bring into the room. And people pick up on it. And so when there's something that's bothering you, but you're not speaking up about it, you don't need to speak up about it for it to come out. It can come up in behavior. It can come up in, again, like how you interact with them, how you don't interact with them. And it starts to become this snowball effect where there's something that's bothering you and you don't want to get into a conflict, so you avoid it. And it just snowballs and snowballs and snowballs, and you shove it down and you try and push it away, but it keeps snowballing until it's this big blowout fight. When really, if you had just spoken up at the beginning or shared your thoughts at the beginning, shared what was bothering you at the beginning, shared what wasn't working for you at the beginning, you wouldn't be in that place. And so that's one way, like trying to avoid conflict, trying to ignore conflict, trying not to get into conflict can inherently, in a kind of paradox way, lead to conflict, because it still comes through even if you don't say it. And so if you're getting into conflicts and you're like, I've been trying to avoid this conflict, I've been trying not to get into this with you, I've been trying to not get into this argument, sometimes the trying not to get into it is what leads to you getting into it. And so what I would invite you to do is to look at, okay, what are some ways in which I could actually bring this up to this person? And in a calm way, in a taking ownership of your own thoughts and feelings way, how can you just speak up? and not make it a big thing. Because sometimes, like, when you make it a big thing in your head, it ends up becoming a big thing. Whereas if you just plainly stated it how you felt, it would just be what it is instead of this big mountain that you made it up to be. So that's one of the ways that ignoring can lead to conflict. But then also ignoring the conflict once it's already happened is one of the big ways that I see people stay in conflict. And in my experience, people try to ignore conflict once it's happened because they think that if they just ignore it, if they don't talk about it, if they don't get into it, then it'll just blow over. And that rarely happens. What ends up happening is more, the way I think about it is like when you ignore conflict once it's happened, it's like going into debt. Like you start compounding interest over time in a negative balance kind of way. And what ends up happening is you're like, oh, I'm just going to ignore it and it's going to be fine. But then as time goes on, you just collect more and more interest. And what that interest is resentment. It's anger. It's frustration. It's why are we pretending that nothing has happened when clearly something has happened, when clearly we've been in an argument, when clearly we've had a fight, when clearly we've had a falling out. And I know so many people who get upset by feeling like they haven't actually worked something through with somebody, but we're just all trying to pretend that everything's okay. And you can feel the tension in the room when you do that. I grew up with this a lot. Actually, like the trying to pretend everything is okay and not speak up about it. And what would end up happening when I was growing up is like there'd be this big blowout fight. There's be this like all these things said, all these word things said, shouting matches, so on and so forth. But then there'd be trying to like make up for it with an act of service or a gift. And that will only get you so far. Because like growing up, I eventually started to feel like, why aren't we talking about this? Like, why, like, is this all in my head? Is this like really not a big deal? Like they're trying to do all these things and they're giving me this gift and they're doing these acts of service things. But I never ever felt grounded and secure and stable because there was never a discussion around what had happened to begin with. It was just being washed over, trying to be painted over, trying to be like moved through without any actual conversations about it. And I remember growing up being very thrown off by this because things never felt okay. Like it felt nice getting a gift. It felt nice getting an act of service. And as an adult, I understood what, like the guilt that my parents probably were feeling and what caused them to do those things. But it never actually resolved the issue or addressed the behavior or addressed the hurt that actually happened. And I realized, like, looking at my childhood experiences and looking at things as an adult, like those things happen in adult relationships all the time, trying to like buy gifts to fix a conflict or to fix hurt feelings. And material goods do not solve emotional problems. But that's the reason why if you give someone a gift and you're like, I'm so sorry for hurting you, they're going to be like, okay, like maybe at first they'll be like, okay, that's great. But as time goes on and you keep doing that, they're going to be like, well, stop hurting me to begin with and you wouldn't have to buy me anything, like buying gifts does not fix the behavioral emotional issue. But all of that is to say, like, when we ignore conflict, because when it's already happened, what ends up happening is just resentment builds and hurt continues to build. And oftentimes this is kind of like a byproduct of that, but also that's when the rumor mills start happening, the gossiping starts happening, the humans picking sides starts happening, is when the two people who are actually in conflict aren't addressing the conflict. And so everyone's venting and everyone's processing with other people instead of actually the person who's caused the harm to begin with. And that just causes more ripples of conflict down the line. And so if you are ignoring things that are bothering you or hurting you, or ignoring conflict once it's actually occurred, that's probably what's leading you to more fights, more arguments, more series of dramas, more dramas than Showtime, for sure. So that's the first one. The second thing that I see causes conflict is when people never actually say the thing that's bothering them. Really what I mean here is passive aggressive comments. So like making side remarks about something, making side gestures that you don't like something or you have a certain opinion, but never actually saying that you dislike something or never actually saying what's wrong. You're just like alluding to what's wrong. And it's kind of like, girl, make your point. And you know, this is another thing that I grew up with a lot. I'm feeling kind of feisty today. I hope that's a fun energy for you to listen in on. I'm feeling a little sassy. But like, if you have something to say it. Like that's me after years of working on communication and emotional regulation and mindset to be okay with myself and comfortable facing conflict and comfortable doing that in relationships. But I think what ends up happening, like when people are in these cycles of conflict, is that there's a lot of passive aggressiveness. There's a lot of like side eye, lots of side eyes going on, lots of like under the comment breaths and like side comments, passive aggressive remarks, all those things, instead of actually just directly saying the thing that's wrong. And it's keeping you in conflict, and it like creates this energy, this sticky energy in the room where you're kind of waiting for someone to attack you. And it doesn't feel good for people. And it can't feel good for you either, if you happen to be the person who makes the passive aggressive remarks or the breath or the under your breath things. Just know that, like, yes, this is a slight call out, but like also I love you. Like, we all have our stuff, we all have our things. I'm a person who can be a little too direct sometimes, and so we all have our stuff. We all have our patterns. But just know that if you are engaging in more passive aggressive remarks, or that is the culture of your relationships, of your friend groups, of your community, it is probably leading to, one, a lot of miscommunication, because people are going to have to guess at what's upsetting you. People are going to have to guess at what's wrong. And then chances are you're going to feel mad and you're going to feel frustrated because people aren't guessing right, which is going to lead to more ripples of conflict. So if something's bothering you, my deep invitation is don't do the passive aggressive remark thing. Just do the this is what's bothering me thing. Number 3, projection. So as people, if you don't know what projecting is basically when you take your own thoughts and emotions and put them on other people. So you like look at people through those lenses, through that light. You paint the picture with your own thoughts and your own feelings. And it's most of the time not really accurate when you project onto other people, project what you think they feel, what you think they mean, what you think they're gonna do. Projection ends up creating a lot of conflict because, one, people don't like it when other people assume intention. That's kind of like a universal truth I found. It's like people don't like it when they're being told what they think and what they feel and what they mean, because chances are what they actually think, feel, and mean is different than that projection. And it leads to a lot of misunderstanding. It leads to a lot of hurt. It leads to a lot of frustration, I find, in relationships. So really look at where might you be projecting onto people? Where might you be upset about something and then assuming that someone else is upset about something, or someone else means, or someone else is going to do something, someone else is going to behave in a certain kind of way? Where are you trying to predict other people's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors? Because oftentimes in that prediction process, it's a lot like the weatherman. Like you kind of know what front is going to come in, but then how accurate is the weatherman really? Like I wake up every day and it's like 30% of rain, and then it's raining and it's like 90% of rain. And it's like, yeah, your prediction wasn't quite accurate. wasn't. And the same things happen in relationships as we try to predict. We try to predict through our own projections, and we end up in a lot of miscommunications, a lot of frustration, and a lot of tension in our relationships, and it's not fun. The last thing I'm going to share here in terms of why I see people getting into conflict is triangular communication. Now, triangular communication is when you are talking to someone, but it's kind of through this intermediary. So, for example, when you are in conflict, let's say you are two people, you're in conflict with a friend of yours, and you go to a mutual friend to vent, to process, to work through whatever it is that's bothering you with this other person. Now, with that shared friend, if that shared friend then goes to the person you're in conflict with and like relays what you said or what's bothering you, what ends up happening is a lot of communication actually gets dropped. So not only is your friend kind of saying what you said, but also they are putting their own projections, their own opinions, their own frustrations, their own stuff onto what you said or what you meant. Or even if you were just like processing, sometimes going through that intermediary makes it just a lot worse. And so if you're engaging in triangular communication, for example, like you have a frustration with somebody, but you're venting to this third party, I invite you to be really mindful of one, who that third party is, because sometimes we do just need to vent as people. Sometimes we just need to get things off our chest. Also, there's a difference between internal processing and external processing. So internal processing is when you process solo internally. External processing is when you process with other people. And so sometimes you want to go to a third source to process, to get a second opinion, to get advice, to get their input, to see if you're in the wrong. There's a lot of reasons to talk to a third party. And I'm not even saying don't do that. I'm just saying like be very mindful of who you do that to. Be very mindful of who that third source is. That's why I encourage people to seek out therapists or coaches as much as I do, is because having a third party person where you can process, where you can get feedback, get advice that isn't actively in your friend community or isn't actively like they have their own stake in a relationship with you. It's gold. Like that relationship is gold with a therapist or a coach, because then you get the processing, you get the feedback, you get the advice, but you don't get the gossip train. You don't get the burden that triangular communication can bring. And so with all of this, like the main advice to take away from the triangular communication is, one, if you are seeking out a third party to process with, just be mindful of who you're processing with. Choose someone you can trust, choose someone who isn't going to relay it, choose someone who is going to really hold that space for you in a very sacred, private way. But two, if you are the third party that someone comes to you for, my deep invitation is set up boundaries around that. So don't then go and relay that information back to the person. Allow them to work it out. Allow them to process it together and try and stay as neutral as possible. It's not an easy position to be in, but it is the reality of how friendships most of the time operate. So just be mindful of okay, like what information am I sharing? And is this really helpful? Is this really going to help them? Is this really going to fix this? And as much as possible, encourage the two people to talk to each other directly. Really be as neutral as possible. I'm going to leave that there today. I know I threw out a few different ways that we get into conflict with other people. So definitely take a moment. I would invite you to listen to this again, actually, and kind of suss out like, okay, where might I be low-key doing this in my life? Where might I be showing up in this way and causing friction knowingly or unknowingly? Where might I have an opportunity to like grow and expand? Because we're all people. People are people. We all have our stuff. I have my stuff. Other people have their stuff. And it's about just doing the best we can with what we have in the moment. And by learning and growing and stretching our edges and acknowledging that there are places that we can grow. So definitely listen to this again. Pick out where you think there might be an opportunity for you to grow, or pick out if like there's something that resonated with you and you've had that experience in the past, and just reflect on how it affected you. Like, how did it affect you that someone else projected onto you? How did it affect you growing up that no one ever addressed conflict? Like, reflect on how it affected you, because when we have the opportunity to contemplate, to reflect on how things are actually affecting us, we have an opportunity to integrate that information on a deeper way and then apply that information to our lives in a deeper way. Again, thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. I really appreciate hearing your feedback. And if you have a particular topic that you would like me to talk about in future podcast episodes, please let me know. I'll definitely put that on the roster. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If something resonated with you in today's episode, if you could leave a review, I would greatly appreciate it. It helps other people learn what we're all about here at Shift Your Story, and it helps this podcast reach listeners who may need to hear what it is that we have to say. If you would like to connect with me or work with me, you can visit my website at www.shiftyourstory.net. You can also find all of my socials on there so you can connect with me in the way that works best for you. I'll see you next time.